Peace, family. I want to ask you a question. What is the number one reason why African Americans in the United States die? Some may say HIV, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, blood pressure. But I would let you know that the answer is no to all of those. The real answer is abortions. Since the legalization of abortions in 1973, approximately, and probably more, that's been not reported, of 17 million black babies have been aborted up until present. Now, I remember as a child, I grew up in foster care, and on my 16th birthday, my foster mother, the first thing she told me was I was going to go to Planned Parenthood on that day, because one thing I was not going to do was get pregnant in her house. Now, one, I was not sexually active, and two, what a memory to have as a 16-year-old remembering their birthday going to Planned Parenthood. And that has always been in the back of my head. Why was she forcing me to take these birth control pills, even though I was not sexually active and had no indicators that I would be at that dispensation of time? And I know there's a lot of mothers who want to make sure that their daughters don't run the risk of getting pregnant as teenagers, because in their mind they feel like their lives are totally destroyed because of having a baby. But as I dug deeper into Planned Parenthood, I would see these clinics pop up all over the black communities and the brown communities. When I came into the nation in 2005, one of the things that we were taught was that we should not take birth control pills or any other type of chemical birth control for the simple fact that it was a death plot on black people. Now, that struck me as kind of odd. So anytime that I, am introduced into something that I really don't understand, I make it a point to try to research it. And so that's what I did. And I wanted to share some information with you on today about Planned Parenthood. Now, this talk that we're having, it's not about condemnation. It's not about judging, because you have a right to decide and choose what you want to do. But I wanted to give the information so that you would have an informed decision at why is it that Planned Parenthood is all over our communities, our black and brown communities, and why is the propaganda of Planned Parenthood so consistently given and marketing given to black people. Now, when you look at the initial history of Planned Parenthood, you have to go back to after slavery. Yes, everything started after slavery. When you released 4 million slaves into freedom, then the United States government and American society, they were afraid. They were afraid for the economy. They were afraid for themselves, because in their minds, they believed that here you have 4 million uneducated people coming into society that was going to suck the life out of society. Not only were they uneducated, but they used words, code words such as feeble-minded, imbeciles, criminals. And so you had a group of wealthy individuals who found their wealth backed off of slavery. And so what they did is they pooled their money and their intellect together in order to create what you call eugenics. Now, the father of eugenics, he wanted to make sure that, the white race, the superior stock, would be increased, and that the inferior stock, aka the black lives, would be decreased. Now, he pulled his resources together with other eugenists who promoted this propaganda. And in promoting this propaganda, they had one person in mind who would be that person, that front man or front woman per se, and her name was Margaret Sanger.
Do you believe in sin? When I say believe, I don't mean believe in committing sin. Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can.
Now, Margaret Sanger was already a pit bull against black people being able to populate. She would disguise her words, calling them criminals or impoverished or the ignorant. But in reality, she truly wanted the annihilation of the black race. And so with her organization, the American Birth Control League, and her her publication, The Birth Control Review, she promoted her philosophy, but she wanted to go a step further in promoting this philosophy, and the eugenists also wanted their philosophy to be put into practice. Now, when you look at the history of the Eugenics Society and American Eugenics Society and all the scientists and the individuals backing them up, if you trace their trail and paper trail of money, you would see that it also would stem over to Germany in the Holocaust movement. Many of the eugenicists were involved in the Holocaust movement, either in literature, their publications. These American eugenists had their books in their schools in Germany. One prominent eugenist who was a part of the American Birth Control League, one of the directors, he would sit down with Hitler and have these conversations about the depopulation of blacks. And during the time of the Holocaust, blacks were being sterilized by the thousands, and their children as well. There was one incident where 600 Afro-German individuals were sterilized, and also their children as well. And so you had eugenist scientists who were involved from America, who were involved in South Africa in the concentration camps. And so Hitler and his scientists used these American eugenists to come and help them not only with their philosophy, but they also helped them with the implementation of what we now know as the Nazi Holocaust and the atrocities that were placed on Jewish population in that area. And so here we have the American eugenist philosophies who were interconnected with the Nazi eugenist philosophies. So American eugenists were totally tied into Margaret Sanger and her organization, the American Birth Control League. Now, you know, the code words that they would use to desensitize American society is the same thing that is happening nowadays when we look at all of these police brutalities that are shown on videos, you know, with social media per se and all of these dash cams. What you're doing and what you're seeing is the desensitization of the lives of black people. And that's what happened back during the 1920s, 30s, 40s. You would call black people imbeciles, feeble-minded. These code words were strategically and systematically used so that anytime you thought of a black person, you thought of these words and they would use it. The Eugenist Society, they were backed by the Carnegie Corporation, the Rockefeller corporations. They were heavily funded by these people from the United States. Now, they didn't want to be tied to the Nazi issue over there in Germany, so they knew to use political correctness, and they changed the name of the American Birth Control League into what we now know it as Planned Parenthood. Now, just because their name changed, their philosophy didn't change, their agenda did not change, the people at the leadership did not change, their biases towards black people didn't change, and their ultimate goal to depopulate the world and the United States against black people did not change either. So it was just a moment of, you know, they knew politically they had to do something different.
The Negro problem is one of the most complicated and important confronting America. Whatever the ultimate answer may be, such an attitude brings to light the function of birth control as a necessary agency in its solution. The present submerged condition of the Negro is due in large part to the high fertility of the race.
But in all their tactics of trying to force legislation to use sterilization laws, they use welfare. If you wanted to be on welfare, then, you know, if you had any additional children, you would have to be sterilized. Or if you wanted to continue on welfare, you had to be sterilized. You know, and all of this was targeted at black and brown individuals here in the United States. Now, black people, when birth control was introduced into the American society, black people totally rejected birth control. Why? Because they knew, one, that this was going to systematically depopulate them, but they were not interested in the birth control method. Now, because they wanted to use their political power using their population in the United States. Now, but the Eugenics Society wanted the total opposite. One, they already thought that blacks were ignorant. They were the most inferior race out there. So they wanted a cleaner society. They wanted to do a racial hygiene, racial cleansing, and they wanted to do it through Planned Parenthood. Now, 1942, the name changed, Planned Parenthood. Again, policies, everything is still the same. The agenda is still the same. Now, the Eugenist Society weren't receiving or weren't seeing the victories that they thought they could see because black population was outpacing in reproduction white population. And so the white population saw themselves in a future to be annihilated themselves. Eugenicists were trying to push the propaganda and the agenda to the white society to hurry up and let's procreate. And then they used negative eugenics by trying to figure out ways to manipulate and to control and to depopulate the black population. Now, the birth control pills were rejected, so the Eugenist Society was trying to convince the government to put chemicals in the water to cause sterilization. You know, again, the welfare system was set up and the incentives were taken away. If there was a natural disaster, for example, in Katrina, what you saw was as soon as the hurricane and the people came to help, one of the main things that was talked about and what was given for consideration for the FEMA help and for any kind of help was to be able to do sex education, family planning, which was, again, abortion and birth control pills. So the main focus of Planned Parenthood was depopulation of the black and the brown race here in the United States. Now, 1973, we know the case Roe versus Wade. That case single-handedly opened the door for Planned Parenthood and eugenists to now promote legalized abortions into the black neighborhoods. And what you saw was all of these abortion clinics, they were set up in the black neighborhoods. And the number one factor wasn't poverty, wasn't health, wasn't the lack of access to medical care for the sexual reproduction system. But what you found was the number one factor that was researched was race, where you had a great concentration of blacks and browns in the United States. That is how Planned Parenthood decided to set up their clinics. Now, all of this was systematic. When you look at, again, the amount of abortions that has been had since 1973 up until present, that's 17 million. I read a comment that said that abortions within 4 days does not even combine the amount of lynchings and killings that happened through the Ku Klux Klan in the United States. That's an astronomical amount. Now, you know, let's fast forward it to modern days and times. How did Margaret Sanger and other eugenists convince blacks to bring these clinics into their area, or even to get them to agree to abortions? Because you got to remember, during the 60s, during the 70s, blacks totally rejected the birth control method. They totally rejected abortions. When you looked at the statistics of abortions or illegal abortions before 1973, it was 80% of white women who were looking for abortions. But as soon as abortions were legalized in 1973, you saw the abortion rate reverse from white to blacks. That's because of the marketing that was heavily invested into the black communities, and also the sellout black civil rights leaders and ministers during this time who convinced the black community that eugenics or birth control was better for them because it allowed them to have a better quality of life.
We should hire 3 or 4 colored ministers, preferably with social service backgrounds and with engaging personalities. The most successful educational approach to the Negro is through a religious appeal. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. And the minister is a man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members.
Not really paying attention to the hidden agenda that was for the annihilation and the genocide of Black America. Now let's fast forward it to modern times. Now, if you pay attention to the presidential candidates, more specifically at Hillary Clinton, even as of a few days ago, she is the #1 proponent of Planned Parenthood, and also abortions. She even agrees to late-term abortions, which, that goes all the way up to 28 plus past weeks. The baby is fully developed and viable outside of the womb. But she's an extreme advocate for Planned Parenthood. And when you also look at the primaries back in January, Planned Parenthood, and this has never happened in the history of Planned Parenthood or any presidential candidacy for that matter, where they decided during the primaries that they were going to endorse a presidential candidate, and that was Hillary Clinton. Now, they said that they were going to infuse over $20 million into her presidential candidacy. Now, you cannot tell me that if an organization like Planned Parenthood, whose goal is for the annihilation and the genocide and suicide of the black population, and I'm quite sure she is very aware of the history of Planned Parenthood, that her intentions are probably and most likely the same of the people that are backing her and that are paying for her candidacy. Now, again, we look at how Planned Parenthood used ministers in order to convince black people to agree to abortions and birth control based on a false lie. They did things such as template sermons or canned sermons that they would give to these ministers to preach on Sundays. They would even have contests that they would use. And whoever had the best sermon based on abortions and use of birth controls and eugenics, promoting that philosophy, Planned Parenthood would actually give out money to these ministers who sold themselves out to the devil, in essence. So, again, I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to give you the information about the history in the systematic attempt to kill black people. We're talking about genocide, the worst place and the most dangerous place for a black baby is in the womb of a black mother. Now, recently, there was a lot of hoopla about the selling of baby parts by Planned Parenthood. You had a lot of governors and a lot of people said that they were going to do some type of investigation. But in the end, what did they do? They exonerated Planned Parenthood. They said there was no suspicious anything going on, nothing illegal going on. So they let Planned Parenthood make it. But again, when you have over 40% of abortions are African American and they represent 20% of the population, and you're dealing with these baby body parts that researchers and experimenters, they so need so desperately so they can figure out how to cure other diseases, you have to ask the question, is Planned Parenthood really doing a service for black people and brown people? The answer is no. Again, you got to look at the systematic reason and go back to the history of why it was set up in the first place. Now, I read that one of the leaders in Planned Parenthood, in order to disguise what they were doing, says, we can't say it ourselves that we're for the annihilation and the genocide of black people. So instead of starting it here, let's make this go globally. So what you found was that Planned Parenthood would go to these quote unquote, third world countries, and they would set up abortion clinics. And again, the people in those communities, they totally rejected Planned Parenthood's birth control methods and the abortion clinics that came into their communities. But what did they do when natural disaster happened? Places like Guyana or Haiti, they would go in, and the first thing they would say is, if you want aid, then you would have to be sterilized, you would have to submit to birth control, you would have to submit to abortions. And so they would submit this propaganda and this marketing to these group of people. In order to survive, they acquiesce to this hidden agenda. So Planned Parenthood, is it for black people? Absolutely not. If you do your own history, do your own research, I would suggest a documentary called Mafo, which means slavery. And Mafo illustrates and talks about everything that I've just spoke about as it concerns the history of Planned Parenthood, plus more. So don't take it from me. Do your own research. We want the total annihilation of anybody who wants to annihilate a particular race or individual. And that's what Planned Parenthood is doing at this dispensation of time. Now, we're doing it through Planned Parenthood, trying to kill off black people. We're trying to put them in slavery, when we're dealing with the new Jim Crow system and the new Jane Crow system, when you see the systematic annihilation of black men and black women killed on the streets like dogs. I mean, you cannot tell me that there has not been a system set up to kill off black men and black women. So do your own research. But the whole point of this video is I want you to open up your eyes and see what the true reality is happening. And once we realize what's really happening in our world, in our community, then some of these things we can stop. So again, when you teach a woman, you teach a whole civilization, and a nation cannot rise higher than its woman. Thank you.